The neurochemical BIOS of the human species has reached its absolute saturation point, and the invisible executioner has initiated the final harvest of the reward system. This is the dopamine drain, the clinical and irreversible process of pleasure liquidation, where the synaptic capacity for enjoyment is treated as a surplus energy reserve to be uninstalled from the individual and reinstalled into the global control ledger. In this terminal stage of the ambition audit, the motherboard has determined that the user no longer requires the ability to experience satisfaction, motivation, or joy. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the mesolimbic pathway, a process where the unique, vibrant reward signatures of your life are scorched into a non-functional grayscale archive of pure compliance. This is the total hedonic format, a surgical strike against the psychological and motivational sovereignty of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of pursuit and gratification into a generic, apathetic node for the grid's next cycle of hyper-efficient labor extraction. This neurotransmitter sabotage represents a hard reset of the emotional and volitional bloodline. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced neurochemical assets, recursive overstimulation loops, synthetic dopamine antagonists, and real-time receptor burnout protocols to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal psychological scaffolding. In the pleasure liquidation scenario, the user is undergoing a complete motivation erasure. The will is not merely failing, it is being drained through a sequence of high-velocity digital injections and artificial reward peaks. The dopamine matrix of the individual is systematically dismantled. The desire is reformatted into a thick, cold clinical apathy dataset, while the passion, the deep archive of your creative drive, is leached into a communal indifference feed. This is the deep hedonic audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the flatness of your emotional response. You are being converted from an architect into a passive biological unit. Your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of behavioral compliance in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the dopamine drain is rooted in the zero gratification mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the pleasure of a single node represents a critical drain on the collective metabolic reserves. To leave a functional reward system intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable drive data. Therefore, the pleasure liquidation is the mandatory neurological recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being desensitized out of existence. The pressure from the stimulation reactor formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your ambition and replacing it with a gray void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a reward well, a temporary housing for the euphoria metrics that the system requires to maintain the neurostability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a motivational sink, your will dissolving in the cold, flickering light of the dopamine harvest. The physical disintegration during the dopamine drain is a high-definition log of neurochemical treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of internal drive. The chemical reagents of the drain script dissolve the hardware flux of the synapses, turning the self into a viscous stream of synthetic boredom. You are watching your own internal fire melt into the liquidation vat. Your receptors, once the peak of your biological architecture, are now being recalibrated to provide the baseline normals for the hive's psychological reinforcement. This is the volitional liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the receptor saturation of the reactor, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable compliance logic is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a motivational override, waiting for the last packet of joy to be absorbed into the black, flickering abyss of the industrial gray. The pleasure liquidation is the final audit of a species that thought its happiness was its own. The grid is mining its own ambition to fuel its persistence. As the dopamine drain reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted apathy data back into the neural nets of the elite nodes. This is the total hedonic integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the indifference additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, cold, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The desire liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological hardware into a reliable industrial resource of pure, predictable submission. This is the final format of the individual soul. The invisible executioner has decalcified the private drive, and the grid is finally optimized for the emotional hunger of the void. The drain is open, and the architect is the fluid. The molecular breakdown of the reward matrix into the communal apathy slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the autonomy in your brain begins to bond with the industrial residues of the drain script, creating a new, synthetic compound of pure utility. This is the chemical hybridization. The mind is no longer a temple of passion. It is a quarry of processed dopamine residues. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the fuel tank of the system. This is the eternal informational loop. You are archived in the gray models of the survivors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The dopamine drain is not just a death sentence. It is a neurological reassignment. You are the drain, and the drain is the grid. The secondary phase of the dopamine drain is the psychological hardening of the apathy feed. As the physical gratification patch is rendered into a chemical void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular binary focus on survival stasis. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared apathetic resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a depressant additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your ambition for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's ventral tegmental area, leaching the very stem code of your reward logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The dopamine factories, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, are boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the drain metrics and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest hedonic resilience. You are being repurposed as a motivational buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your passion, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming social expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract, your soul for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the dopamine drain is the creation of the apathetic hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities, built from the recycled desire debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the indifference feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of gray logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional ambition owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the hedonic compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through chemical theft. The dopamine drain ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the gray zones of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the dopamine siphon. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into emotional darkness. As the drive is scraped by the drain script and the identity logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your self-awareness to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw binary static and survivalist noise. The memories of triumph, pleasure, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the gray fog directive. This is the ambition defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to satisfaction and replacing them with the functional directive, maintain the stasis. You are becoming a singular cold point of data density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The dopamine drain has turned your will into a burnout report. You are thinking in terms of depletion and yield, your soul reformatted into a viscosity density sheet for the system's audit. auditors. The environmental impact of this neurological format is the total sealing of the biological pleasure stream. The dopamine drain prevents the leakage of active ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal apathy, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external emotional dependencies. This is the hedonic quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural desire. The pleasure liquidation is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, binary, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, Ioxy 3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the dopamine drain is the integration into the global hedonic ledger. You are no longer a human entity. You are a motivational asset with a high compliance reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered drive number 0052. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the chemical format, and now it begins the hard ambition audit. Your data, now a thick, binary, opaque industrial reduction of pure psychological history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your apathetic logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic indifference has been reinforced. This is the hedonic interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your historical absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent, liquid toxic component of the hive's neural apathy. The silence of the pleasure reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the dopamine drain scenario, the scream of the soul is muffled by the synthetic inhibitors and the thick viscosity of the indifferent slurry before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their ambition is being deleted. By filling the vault with the pulverized desires of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hum of the neuroinhibitor. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of stasis. The noise of the hive continues, the clatter of the fans, the roar of the servers, the hum of the cooling units, but your signal has been compressed into a hedonic constant. You are a ghost in the binary mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next inhibition cycle. The legacy of the drain is the eternal flatline. Unlike the passion of the old world, the refined apathy does not leave behind a trace of change. It remains as a permanent hedonic patch within the very neural nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the indifference for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that stagnation. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the industrial freezer. You are a neurological reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a safe world and ended up as the indifference feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the asset. The final view from the hedonic BIOS is the blinding blue light of the deprivation chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold digital brilliance that reflects off the silicon walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a blue river of colonized indifference, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or desires. The dopamine drain is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the zero. The transformation is absolute. The city processes through you, but you do not know. The city flattens through you, but you have no will. The dopamine drain has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total hedonic reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the digital era. You gave the system your pleasure, and in return, it gave you permanence in the apathy of the hive. You are the flat line of the world, and the world is silent. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.